It went on a bit longer. I do apologize than I expected it to. There were a few scenes in it I hadn't actually seen before. The version that I have is a bit chopped up, and I actually have two versions. One is very chopped up, but this one actually includes some scenes that make a lot more sense of the movie than the version I have. Oh, sorry. But it's I think it's a lovely movie, and a very profound one, as I said to start with. I mean, you know what I think. It's a Pied Piper, a version of the Pied Piper, and one that's adapted to the magic land that the rats and the children of Hamelin imagined they were going to. It may have found a bit of a disappointment, and as people always do when they look for magic lands and magic ways into them. But I'd much rather hear what you have to say.
Well, first of all, let me say that I thought that it was an absolutely terrific movie. Very surprising to me. I hadn't known what to expect. I'm perhaps at a disadvantage with others who've seen the film Goodbye Lenin, because that was a film which we were comparing it to. But I haven't seen that film, and I'm now going to go out and do so too. But it is a magical land. You say it disappoints. It doesn't entirely disappoint, does it?
No.
Right. In other words, there is something there. And of course, they're making a commentary on the difference between the way Russia has developed and the way the West has developed, very obvious, really. But at the same time, there is something in that Paris that makes it appealing and charming. And it's not just either the prosperity of Paris or our vision of Paris, because I noticed that the part that music played in the movie, you knew you were in Paris when a certain kind of music occurred, and we all associate Paris, I think, with a certain kind of optimism, hope, charm. I hesitate to use the word magic because it's a very human kind of magic, but we do associate it with that. And the moment we hear a certain kind of music, we go into a certain mood about Paris, and that I thought came across very well. Now, that's me. Anyone from the floor would like to comment or ask a question, or both?
Did you like it? Did you enjoy it?
Yes.
It was a good film?
Did anyone not enjoy it, by the way? Okay. Second question, how many people here have seen Goodbye to Lenin?
Goodbye, Lenin.
One,
yeah.
Two. Well, the critic's wife doesn't count in this context. So the only other person here was Martin, I think. And so I want to ask you, would you, let me give you the microphone for a second and ask you to compare and contrast those movies.
Really hard remembering movie plots, but what comes to my mind is that I think Goodbye Lenin is a kind of nostalgic in a very false way. I don't see whether there is. I wouldn't see any nostalgia to that kind of regime. So, but by the way, what this movie told me that in Russia actually communism didn't make any progress or regress, because it's the humor of Gogol. In this movie, so it's very, very Russian, and they see the way the figures are, and they see the world are very much of the old Russia. I see some parallels to Bulgakov, Master and Margarita. For instance, the other way, of course, in that novel, a metaphysical world is coming to step in the ordinary world of those people in Moscow, but in a sense this is still an outside world. Paris, it's a fictional world. It's a utopia that comes into this real environment where the people live.
Yeah, you say Goodbye Lenin was a false nostalgia, but all nostalgia is false in a way. That's in the nature of nostalgia, to falsify our experiences or maybe to make them truer. Who knows? It changes them anyway. It makes them.
Although the experience of Nicole when she's in Russia, is a brutal depiction of life there. I mean, there's no nostalgia in that episode, is there? It's horrible, and you feel, I felt trapped with her, and I felt all the feelings that she felt in it. So I think it wasn't exactly my view. It wasn't nostalgia there. How does Russia come out of this movie? I mean, what are the redeeming features? There are suggestions of human warmth and all that, but they don't. Those people are not really very warm in their treatment of others, are they? Look at what happens to Nicole when she actually gets there. But also, the amusing thieves are simply vandals and exploiters. How was the film received in Russia?
Well, I don't think it was terribly well received anywhere. I mean, the fact that it got a showing in the West is significant because there's not that many Russian films that do. But I think it was popular enough at the time, but it hasn't lasted in the way that you would think of a film like that would. I mean, it's not something that people refer to as a classic, although I think it is a sort of Russian classic.
I think it's a film which could easily be revived, as a matter of fact. That is to say, shown again and get an audience, because I thought it was a very, very good film. And it spoke to one at several levels. You got to really feel strongly about the different characters, there was a real. I mean, it wasn't a very obvious film at any point. Even the romantic element was extremely restrained. You hardly, it's underplayed, I think. Right. Any other questions? Any points that anyone would like to make?
I'm slightly puzzled by the ending. Because Nikolai has urged the children to go back to accept their
Yeah.
to remember their parents and to build a better society. There is at the end, trying to dig it off.
Yes. Yes. Well, as I said.
But can you repeat that point?
Yes, Jerry makes a very good point that the ending seems a bit incongruous after that sort of climactic moment in Paris when he says, you know, you were born into a miserable, bankrupt country, but it's your country, you need to go back. But it's in the nature of that kind of utopianism too that it's addictive. I think that's really the point of the film. Once you get into your head the idea of this magic land, you can't let go of it. It becomes the other place. It's always where you're not, and that's what we got to in the end.
The only person who's got a real reason there is Nikolai.
He's left his love.
That's right. But I agree. I mean, I think that you can't. If you're living in Russia, you're bound to want to be somewhere else. It seems to me at that point. Yes, another Martin.
Thank you. Just a small point that in Russia, the progressives tend to look to Paris and particularly France when they were finding ideals for themselves. So Paris was a focus point of them. And in this regard, I think it's a double utopia because St. Petersburg was designed by Peter the Great on French patterns.
Yeah.
So they are living in a city which was designed after France. And
Anti-Paris.
Yes.
Bizarro Paris. Right. Yes. Very good point.
Do you want to develop that at all?
Well, yes, because the parallels are stressed throughout, and I was going to say also there's criticism of the French as well. The scene in this decadent club where they all, it's a sort of nudist club for a musical club that's been going for 300 years. It's a foreigner's view of Paris in both in the positive sense and in the negative sense. It's both the magic land and the land of these frog gobblers who have strange ways that we will never understand.
Melissa, would you like to? Is there anything you would want to add at this point?
I thought it was extremely enjoyable on many levels.
Okay.
And now I want to go back and see
Well, they haven't been doing much, I can tell you. That's one of the tragedies, I think, is that although he's still around, he's only made, I think, 2 more films in the last 20 years. It's not easy.
And this brings up the question of, what is the state of Russian film today?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not really qualified to answer that, but it's not. Not much of it gets to the West. Very little.
Well, not for a long time has that happened. That's true. Look, what I'm going to do now is bring the formal proceedings to a halt. I'm going to suggest to Martin, who is going to interview Jim, whether or not you couldn't possibly interview him in these circumstances, with the camera rolling. And is that possible for you, or would you prefer not to? Because I think it will interest everybody else, as a matter of fact. Well, in that case, let me yield my position. Let me thank everybody. Let me say that if people, wish to now disappear, they can. But I'm now going to introduce Martin Baranier of the Centre for Europe, the Central Europe Policy Centre, who also doubles as a film critic, and I'm going to invite him to interview James Bowman, and I will take my I'll take my position in the audience. Do you need 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
2 minutes, you mean? I'd rather 15. Is that
Yeah, no.
I have my questions.
Okay.
But I have to find
I don't know how interesting this will be to the rest of you.
I hope this will be interesting.
Yeah. Feel free to.
Yeah, actually, I'm doing this for Hungarian kind of blog, so.
Well, for whatever you want to do, I hope I can give some satisfactory answers.
My first question is that since you worked for a lot of famous conservative papers and sites, do you think that is there such a thing as a conservative movie review?
No. Well, I think conservative movies are non-political movies, or movies which strive to create a zone in which politics doesn't necessarily intrude. That's extremely important, I think, because there are the territory in which politics is not obtruding now is growing ever smaller all the time. Everything is political, and film criticism is about as political as it gets, both in America and around the world, and it's progressive, as we in America say. Progressive meaning left in its orientation. There's a whole sort of culture of film criticism and filmmaking, which is political in a very overt way, and so to me, conservative film criticism, as like conservative films, is that which somehow manages to pull back from that, manages to escape, manages to get back to the magic land of movies 50 or 60 years ago when they weren't so.
I was asking this question only because there are a lot of lists on the internet that with the best movies for liberals, socialists,
yes.
and conservatives. So you disagree with them?
Well, I don't. I do disagree. Whenever I see those lists, I rarely agree with the ones that people call conservative movies or good movies. I mean, to me, a conservative movie is a good movie, whatever its other properties. It doesn't matter to me if it's good, and even political movies can can be good and therefore conservative movies. But for the most part, if they're good, it means they're not so political.
Does cinema became over-politicized? I'm thinking about, for instance, Michael Moore on one hand, but I can mention your colleague Ben Steen on the other hand, who made a documentary. So did cinema become a ground for culture war, or is just, or it has always been the case?
Well, not always, but since the 60s, I think. I mean, before that there was also a political cinema, but it wasn't as much of the movie business as it is nowadays, both in Europe and in America. The politicization of film and film studies dates back to the 1960s, and as we know it today, as we understand it today, I think. And it's very comprehensive.
Which films would you use to educate young Americans on the country's history?
American history? Well, there are a lot of good ones. I think not to be repetitive, but I think that the great films of Hollywood's golden era, as it's sometimes called, from 1930 to 1960. Are not only aesthetically profound and interesting, but also it's a reflection of the country in the way, not only in the way that it really was, which it is, but also in the way that people wanted to see it, and that's always very revealing, I think, how people. The Western, for instance, for many, many years was often, if not always, used as a way that America wanted to present itself to itself and to the world, as you know, a world of rugged individualists who tamed the wilderness and settled the continent.
Can you name a few examples?
Well, my favorite Western is John Ford's *The Searchers*, partly because it's complex and critical. It doesn't take a simplistic, how the West was one sort of approach to things. It sees things as I think they probably were, in a way that not many of the great Westerns do. But it's also a very great film. I also like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's because that in a way is a very political film. It tells us, I think, something very true about the way in which the civil society depends on the man with the gun, but doesn't want to recognize that. In the end, it likes to think of itself as not needing those kind of heroes, but to be a world of laws and civilized values.
High Noon or Rio Bravo? What's the counterpart? Is it Rio Bravo?
Well, I like both. I think I don't. You may not know that Rio Bravo, the John Wayne Western, was made as a riposte to because Wayne thought that High Noon, though a very great film in a lot of ways, was too critical of America and saw Americans as the people in the town who won't help the marshal fight the bad guys, and Wayne thought that was a slander on America and Americans, and made Rio Bravo. But I see the virtues in both films. I think they're two sides of the same coin.
But I think a leftist critic would say to you that the 60s were just when American films lost their idealism or naivety.
Well, yes, that's what a left-wing critic would say, and I I think they, whatever they lost, they gained something that they would be better off without. That political element that I think is false. That's the problem with it.
Are films part of intellectual history, or are they just examples to intellectual history?
Well, I suppose they are. Yes, they are. But they're both. They're examples, and they're part of intellectual history. But a very distinct part, because they are. There's something necessarily trashy about film. I think it's wedded to the popular culture in a way that it can never quite escape. However artistic, however beautiful, however well made it is, the film always sort of brings us back down to, from the aesthetic heights that great art might present to us. It brings us down to that level of the gritty popular culture, which now I think we've sort of learned to celebrate with the cartoon movie. I mean, virtually all movies are cartoon movies these days, and it's in a way it's film saying, well, why should we aspire to anything better, because we are inevitably just trash. And although there's some truth in that, we have the example of the great films of the past to show us how that trash can transcend itself sometimes.
I'm asking this because of course I may be wrong on that, but you criticize movies in a literary fashion. I mean, like the best literary critics like T.S. Eliot would have done. What do you think? What's the role of the critic, and what do you think about critics like for instance Roger Ebert, who used TV and every kind of media presence to popularize his opinion?
Well, I don't. I mean, I know of him. I haven't made a study of his criticism, but I can only speak for myself, and I think, you know, what I aspire to do anyway, and I don't know how successful I am at doing it, is to make people see where things are good, where things are worth seeing, where something good has been done, and of course I've got to get through an awful lot of movies where not very much good has been done, but I'm always on the lookout for somebody who has who's done something good, and then I try to explain why I think they have done something good.
You think myth or meta-narrative plays a huge part in those movies?
I think it often does, yeah. I mean, as in this example that we just saw, if a movie is going to be good, it is so partly because it plugs itself into the wider culture, and the myth is a good way to do that. I mean, here we have the myth of the Pied Piper. The quest is a great theme of the searchers, and the myths of the past can be revived and retooled and made into something interesting in contemporary terms. That to me is what I'm always looking for.
You mentioned the golden age of Hollywood, but what about the Christian epics? I mean, one can see one can see Ben-Hur every Christmas on TV in Hungary. But what about contemporary? Yes, and even Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth.
Yeah.
But what about the role of religion, or particularly Christianity in American cinema? I mean, nowadays.
That's a good question. I have not seen Ben-Hur or the Ten Commandments or any of those films since I was a child. I should probably go back and look at them and see whether there is anything to them. I always assume that there's not, because that's the sort of the default critical position, that this is, kitsch, and not something that's worth wasting time on. But maybe there's more to it than that. I don't know.
Aren't we getting a bit nostalgic about these movies?
Yes, maybe I am. Yes. I'd like to see them. I'd be afraid to. I'm afraid. I think they were awful, but maybe they're not.
Mentioning Christianity and myth, there is a recurrent theme in contemporary American cinema, which is apocalypse or post-apocalyptic movies, which of course gets us back to the old circular view on history with periods. Why is that there are so many movies dealing with the end of things, the end of time?
I think it's political. It's people imagining an ideal future for political reasons. This is what we've come to because of your, the ecological apocalypse, for instance. Well, it's all the people who preach.
So this kind of disaster is a new kind of utopianism.
Yeah, it's a kind of reverse utopianism. It's saying it's extrapolating the bad things in our culture into some ideal future and saying this is where we're going. This is listen to me, or this is what will happen. It's just another form of political movie making, I think, and not very interesting. I mean, I haven't seen any good apocalyptic movies.
Really?
I can't think of any. Can you suggest one? Maybe I have.
I think the one made of the Cormac McCarthy novel was The Road or something.
Actually, I never saw that. It seemed like just another apocalyptic movie. So I didn't bother. But no, the other one by him was what was it? The Cohen.
No Country for Old Men.
No Country for Old Men.
I didn't like that one.
Didn't like it. It was for that reason. It was a kind of reversal. It was a kind of anti-religious movie, I think.
But with that movie, we got back to the Western. Is there any future for that genre?
Got back to what? Sorry.
The Western movies.
Oh, the Western. Yeah. Well, in a way, I suppose. I don't know. Actually, there have been. Now you put me on the spot. I'm trying to think. I think I have seen one or two westerns and updated westerns that weren't too bad, but I can't.
3:10 to Yuma.
Well, that was awful. The original was good, but the remake was terrible. No, I keep hoping. I'll see a western that. But remakes are always bad anyway. I can't think of a remake that's ever.
I remember it was John Hillcoat's movie. It was western. It was quite nihilistic, but I really liked that one. But it was John Hillcoat. I can't remember the title.
John Hillcoat.
It was in an Australian environment.
Oh.
I don't want to torture you with that, so we can move on.
I don't know whether it's.
What do you think about the role of the canon? Because since cinema is a relatively young form of art, and viewers tend to be more enthusiastic about movies than, for instance, paintings. Mm-hmm. There is a pressure to say something on that, and you mentioned the classical period of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. Are you in favor of establishing a canon, and what films would count in a canon? In a canon. Canon.
Oh,
sorry.
The canon. I see. The canon of great films. You mean since the
start of the cinema?
Since the start.
Or is there any reason that how did you pronounce it, sir?
Canon.
Canon. So to establish a canon for.
I'm always suspicious of that sort of great books establishing the canon and all that sort of thing. I mean, I can see that there's some usefulness to it, but there's so many. How could you exclude? There's the canon of the good, and there's an awful lot of good stuff, or there was. There still is some, So I could make a list. of the films. You can find it on my website, actually. You just go to the 2-star movies. Those are the
Which
ones
comes up the question, I know it's a lousy one, but I have to ask it.
That's right.
What are your top 10 films, or the most important films, or the most important films in American cinema?
Top 10 American films or top 10 films ever?
It's up to you whether to choose the 10
Lord.
movies.
See, I don't know whether I can. I don't think I can do that. But my favorite, whenever anybody asks me, my favorite film is Jules et Jim, François Truffaut, 1962. Probably because I saw it at the right time in my life when I was a young man. But it's also, in a way, it's like this film. It's a film about people who believe that the world can be perfected, that all the old rules don't apply anymore, and we can start the world over again. And they find that you can't, that it doesn't.
9 more, or maybe let it be 4.
Great. Well, I mentioned The Searchers. That would be in there. Foreign films. They're so completely different. But my favorite director is Eric Rohmer, one of the French New Wave. Those are beautiful, wonderful films. They're like not films. They're the least trashy movies ever made, I suppose. But they are, there's a painterly quality to them, which is just wonderful. And I don't know whether I could pick just one of them. My favorites are I suppose the ones he made in the 80s when he was already in his 60s. But under the general title of Comedies and Proverbs. Wonderful movies, all of them. American classics, well, my favorite American film, maybe, besides The Searchers, Treasure of the Sierra Madre from 1948, Humphrey Bogart. Tim Holt and Walter Houston hunting for gold in the Sierra Nevada. It's a wonderful movie. And made from a book by a communist, Traven, a German communist who fled to Mexico after 1918 and wrote this book, which was designed to promote Marxist ideas, but it transcends. I mean, there's a perfect example of a political film which doesn't depend on the politics, which goes far beyond the political.
+1.
+1? Golly. I'd have to mention a great Central European director who came to America, Ernst Lubitsch.
Actually, there were a lot.
There were a lot. You're absolutely right about that. But Lubitsch, perhaps, since I'm in Budapest, I would mention the great film set in Budapest with James Stewart and Margaret Sullivan, The Shop Around the Corner, by Ernst Lubitsch, and it's a wonderful movie that I never get tired of.
You already mentioned Rohmer and the French New Wave, which can be seen as quite an unconservative movement in cinema, can we?
What can be?
Unconservative.
What's unconservative?
The French New Wave.
The French, yes, very, very unconservative, yeah. But again, Godard aside, when it's at its best, it's not really political, I think. Even Godard, Breathless isn't not terribly political, although I don't think it's that great a movie, but it's not like his later stuff.
By the way, what's your opinion about the Hollywood Code, or particularly censorship on movies? Is it an evil puritanic censorship, or it's a natural defense reaction to violence, for instance? Because I bring this question up because of the movies of Tarantino's, which are sometimes admittedly turn into the violent orgy.
Yes. I don't myself. I can't bring myself to say I'm in favor of censorship, but I am in favor of self-censorship. I think those movies should not have been made because they're worthless. They're violence porn, really, and there's no redeeming value to Django Unchained or some of the later Tarantino. Some of the early ones weren't too bad, but I think that kind of graphic violence serves no purpose except to titillate in a way that explicit sex does, and I think, you know, although I wouldn't ban them, I think people ought to be restrained enough to not to go to them.
By writing a critique on Avatar, you mentioned losing the sense of reality, but what do you think? Are there any boundaries to films itself? I mean, to film as it is, because the sound, having good sound is no novelty, having 3D is no novelty. So, and CGI is the illusion of the illusion.
Yeah.
But you already wrote in favor of gravity, which
That's
do.
right. Yes. Well, that just goes to show you there are no rules. There's nothing you can say. It can't be any good. Even 3D, as in Gravity, it can be good. It can have something to say. But I think it's harder. A lot of the computer-generated stuff makes it harder to make a good movie. There's a certain reminder of the artifice. There's a certain, you know, being in two dimensions. It's you know, as Robert Frost said about free verse, it's like playing tennis with the net down. You know, having the sort of restrictions that two dimensions impose upon you is what creates art. It seems to me, and the 3D stuff is mostly, gravity aside, not much worth seeing. But you know, I never say never. That gravity shows it can be done.
Thank you.